The air in the twilight ring always tasted like burnt copper and recycled oxygen, but inside the silver citadel of Ethelgard, it smelled of something far more expensive. It was the scent of manufactured spring, a floral perfume that probably cost more than my entire ship, the Star Skimmer, and the 5 years of debt I still carried on her hull. I adjusted the collar of my Courier jacket, which was stained with a stubborn blotch of engine grease despite my best efforts to scrub it out with industrial solvent. I felt like a jagged piece of scrap metal in a room full of polished diamonds. My boots, reinforced with heavy-duty Durasteel toes, made a dull, rhythmic thud against the crystalline floor. Every aristocrat in the grand hall turned to look, their vocal lace collars glowing with soft, judgmental hues of violet and amber. In the world of the highborn, or glints as we in the docks called them, silence was a weapon, and they were currently aiming a full battery at me. I clutched the delivery scanner in my left hand and the small lead-shielded canister in my right. Package ID. Alpha 907, I muttered to myself, checking the digital manifest for the 20th time. Urgent delivery for the High Coordinator of the Silver Line. Premium rates applied. I had delivered supplies to some hellish corners of the Kalthura system. I had navigated the volcanic vents of the Sunside and dodged pirate interceptors in the frozen wastes of the dark side. I once spent 3 days in a pressurized suit delivering medical isotopes to a research lab floating in a sea of liquid methane. But this wedding was a different kind of hazard. The political tension in the room was so thick you could have sliced it with a plasma cutter. "Excuse me," I said, stopping a man whose robes were woven from literal threads of light. He looked at me as if I were a particularly uninteresting species of space mold. "I am looking for Coordinator Valen. I have a Priority 1 package that requires a biometric signature." The noble leaned back, his ears twitching in the subtle Ethelgard gesture of profound annoyance. "You are late, commoner. The ceremony is concluding. You should have remained at the service docks." I checked my internal clock. "I am exactly 4 minutes ahead of schedule," I countered, keeping my voice level, and the service docks were blocked by 3 dozen ceremonial shuttles. Premium delivery means person to person. If you are not Valen, you are wasting my oxygen. The man gasped, his vocal lace flickering a sharp, angry crimson, but he gestured vaguely toward the front of the hall. The center of the citadel was an architectural marvel, a spire of synapse glass that reached toward the permanent sunset of Kalthura. There, standing on a platform of hovering obsidian, was the reason for all this extravagance. Exarch Vespera looked less like a bride and more like a soldier preparing for a long, grueling siege. Her robes were a cascading waterfall of silver silk, but her expression was frozen, a mask of perfect, icy composure. Beside her stood Lord Thorn of the Iron Line, a man whose reputation for brutality was whispered about in every dive bar from here to the outer moons. This was a marriage of necessity, a bridge built of bone to keep 2 warring houses from glassing the planet. I should have turned around. I should have waited in the shadows until the vows were exchanged and the coordinators were free to sign my damn manifest. But my rent was due in 2 days, and the premium bonus for this job was the only thing keeping the Star Skimmer from being repossessed by the Synaptic Union. I pushed forward. I walked past guards in ceremonial armor that looked more decorative than functional. I ignored the whispers of the crowd, the words like human debris and gutter trash drifting through the air. I reached the edge of the royal platform just as the High Priest of the Silver Line raised his hands to signal the final declaration. "Coordinator Valen," I called out, perhaps a bit louder than I intended. The hall went silent. Even the ambient hum of the life support system seemed to drop an octave. Vespera turned. Her eyes were not the distant, cold gems I had seen on the news broadcasts. They were tired, deeply, existentially exhausted. For a heartbeat, her gaze locked onto mine, and I saw a flash of something that looked remarkably like recognition, though we had never met. The High Priest sputtered, his lace collar turning a frantic, flickering yellow. "Who is this?" "Security, remove this interruption." "Wait," Vespera said. Her voice was quiet, but it carried through the hall with the weight of a planetary collapse. She stepped down from the obsidian platform, her silver robes whispering against the glass. "You are the runner, the one who delivered the isotopes to the methane sea last month." "Kaelen Voss, Your Grace," I said, holding up the canister. "Package for Coordinator Valen. It needs a signature. Now." Thorne stepped forward, his hand resting on the hilt of a ceremonial vibroblade. "You dare interrupt a sacred bonding for a courier manifest? Leave now, or I will ensure your ship never leaves this atmosphere." I looked at Thorne, then back at Vespera. "I have a job to do, Lord Thorne. I do not leave until the manifest is closed. That is the Void Runner code." Vespera looked at the crowd of nobles, then at the man she was about to be tethered to for the rest of her life. A strange, reckless light sparked in her amber eyes. She turned to the high priest, her voice rising in authority. "Under the law of the unbound, I invoke the privilege of the Silver Line," she declared. The hall erupted in a low, panicked murmur. "I choose this man, Kaelen Voss, to be my vow-bearer for the duration of the festivities." I froze. The delivery scanner slipped in my grip. "What?" I stammered. "Your Grace, I just need a signature. I have 3 more deliveries scheduled for the evening." "The position is honorary, Kaelen Voss," Vespera said, her voice dropping to a whisper as she reached me. "But it carries a stipend of 50,000 marks. Does that cover your scheduled deliveries?" 50,000 marks? That did not just cover my deliveries. It covered my rent, my ship repairs, and enough fuel for a trip to the next star system. My social anxiety was screaming like a damaged thruster, but my bank account was singing. "I do not object," I said, trying to stand a little straighter. "But I should mention my formal attire is currently in the wash." "The uniform is fine," she replied, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. "It is the most honest thing in this room." She reached out and took my arm. Her hand was trembling, just a fraction, but her grip was like iron. As she led me toward the reception hall, past 300 stunned nobles and a fuming Lord Thorne, I realized I had just delivered myself into a situation where the exit strategy was nowhere to be found. The reception hall was a sensory overload of high-frequency social maneuvering. Floating trays of synth wine drifted through the air, and the vocal lace of the guests created a shifting kaleidoscope of emotional data that my courier brain struggled to parse. I stood 3 steps behind Vesper on the elevated dais, feeling like a gargoyle on a cathedral. Static, out of place, and slightly ominous. "You are staring," Vespera whispered, without turning her head. She was currently nodding at a duchess, whose lace was glowing with the sickening green of feigned admiration. "I am checking for exits," I replied, my voice low. "It is a professional habit. In my line of work, if you do not know where the door is, you are already dead." "An excellent habit to maintain in this court," she said. "Tell me, Kaelen, what do you see in this room?" I scanned the crowd. "I see 36 people who want to be where you are, and another 100 who are terrified you will stay there. Lord Thorne is currently talking to a group of men in dark gray tunics. Their body language is aggressive. They are not celebrating a wedding, they are planning a takeover." Vespera's posture stiffened. "You are observant. Most people only see the jewels." "I see the logistics," I said. "Power is just another resource. Who has it, who wants it, and how they plan to move it from point A to point B. Right now, Lord Thorne is trying to bypass your authority. He is treating you like a terminal that has already been hacked." A man approached the dais, his robes heavy with the insignia of the Iron Line. He was a brute of a man, his face scarred by what looked like an old plasma burn. He didn't look at Vespera. He looked directly at me with a sneer that made my hand instinctively reach for the multi-tool on my belt. "So this is the vow-bearer?" he spat, a gutter runner with grease under his fingernails. "Is the Silver Line so desperate for allies that they must recruit from the service docks? Kaelen Voss has more integrity in his little finger than your entire house has in its vaults, Commander Drax," Vesper said, her voice like a chilling wind. "He is here because he is unbound. He owes no loyalty to your schemes or mine." Drax laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "Integrity does not win wars, Exarch, and it certainly does not protect you from the inevitable." He turned and walked away, his lace glowing with a triumphant, jagged violet. I watched him go, my eyes narrowing. "He is carrying a concealed pulse emitter," I whispered. "Small, illegal, and high range." "How do you know?" Vesper asked, her composure finally cracking with a hint of genuine surprise. I have delivered them before, I admitted. Not my proudest contract, but you learn the weight and the silhouette of black market tech when you spend your life in the void. He is not here for the wine. He is here to jam your communications. Vespera leaned in closer, her floral scent momentarily masking the copper air. If he jams the Citadel's network, I cannot authorize the planetary defense protocols. My house will be defenseless if the Iron Line decides to move. Then we need to move first, I said. But I am just a courier. I do not have the clearance to touch your systems. Vespera looked down at the canister I was still holding, the one she had arranged for me to deliver. That package, Kaelen, it is not jewelry for the wedding. It is a synapse glass crystal. It contains the security codes for the entire Silver Line, encrypted within my own memories. I had it removed and sent away for safekeeping because I knew Thorn would try to extract it from my mind during the bonding ritual. My heart skipped a beat. You sent your own memories through a standard courier service? I needed someone who wouldn't look inside, she said. Someone who just wanted to get the job done and get paid. I needed a man who would fight for a delivery manifest, because that is the only thing I can trust right now. I looked at the small, heavy canister. I had been carrying the keys to the kingdom in my hand while I complained about my rent. The sheer absurdity of it made me want to laugh, but the look of desperation in Vespera's eyes stopped me. So what is the plan, Your Grace? I asked, my voice turning sharp and professional. If this Drax character is going to pull the plug, we have about 10 minutes before this party turns into a massacre. I need you to get that crystal to the central terminal in the spire, she said, but I cannot leave this dais without Thorn noticing. As the vow bearer, you have the right to move freely through the Citadel for ceremonial preparations. You want me to break into the royal mainframe while wearing a courier uniform? I asked. That is going to be a hard sell for the guards. The guards are confused, she noted. Use that. Look perplexed. Look like you are just doing another job. It is your greatest strength, Kaelen. Nobody expects the delivery man to save the world. I took a deep breath, the burnt copper air feeling a bit more like home. I am very good at looking perplexed, I said. It is basically my default state. But if I am going to do this, the compensation needs to be adjusted. 50,000 more? She offered. Make it 100,000 and a full tank of high-grade fusion fuel for the star skimmer, I countered. Done, she said. Now go, before the static starts. I turned away from the royal dais, tucking the canister under my arm. I didn't run. Running was for people who were guilty. I walked with the steady, purposeful stride of a man who had 40 more packages to deliver and was already behind on his route. I passed Drax, who was currently whispering into his collar. I passed the Duchess with the green lace. I reached the heavy blast doors that led to the spire's core. 2 guards blocked the path, their pulse rifles crossed in a silent no. Delivery for the mainframe maintenance suite, I said, holding up my scanner. Priority 0. If this doesn't get installed in the next 5 minutes, the ambient lighting is going to shift to a flickering strobe, and the Exarch is going to be very, very unhappy with your performance reviews. The guards looked at each other. They looked at my grease-stained jacket. They looked at the official-looking canister. One of them sighed, the universal sound of a worker who didn't want to deal with more paperwork. Just be quick, the guard said, stepping aside. We're supposed to be at the feast in 20 minutes. I will be in and out like a shadow, I promised. As the doors hissed shut behind me, the first wave of static hit. My translator implant buzzed with a painful hum, and the lights in the corridor flickered. The Iron Line had started their move. I wasn't just a courier anymore. I was the only person on Kalthura who could deliver the truth back to the woman who had lost it. I started to run, my Durasteel boots echoing through the hollow heart of the Citadel. The star skimmer was waiting at the docks, but for the first time in my life, I wasn't thinking about the exit. I was thinking about the girl on the dais, wearing a glass crown and waiting for a miracle in a courier's jacket. The internal corridors of the Silver Spire were a stark contrast to the opulence of the Grand Hall. Out here, where the nobles didn't tread, the Citadel showed its bones, ribs of dull titanium, veins of fiber optic cabling, and the constant low-frequency hum of the atmospheric scrubbers. The air was colder here, easily 10 degrees lower than the climate-controlled perfection of the wedding venue. My boots made a frantic, metallic clatter against the floor as I sprinted toward the central hub. The static was getting worse. My translator implant was chirping like a bag of angry insects, trying to filter out the white noise Lord Thorn's jamming pulse was flooding into the air. If I didn't reach the terminal soon, the entire Silver Line network would flatline, leaving Vespera's people blind and deaf while the Iron Line moved in for the kill. I reached the first security checkpoint, a heavy blast door guarded by a pair of sentry droids. They were older models, Mark IV peacekeepers, their chassis scratched and dull. They weren't meant for combat as much as they were meant for intimidation. "Halt!" the lead droid droned, its optical sensor flashing a warning amber. "Authorized personnel only. Identify yourself." "Package delivery," I wheezed, leaning against the cold wall to catch my breath. "Check my manifest. Urgent maintenance for the Cortex Core. If I don't jack this in, the whole spire is going to desync, and we'll all be breathing vacuum by midnight." The droid paused, its processor whirring as it tried to reconcile my grease-stained jacket with the high-priority delivery code I'd punched into my scanner. Searching database, identity, Kaelen Voss. Occupation, Void Runner. Access level, restricted. "Yeah, well, the Exarch upgraded my clearance about 5 minutes ago," I snapped, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice. "Look, Clanker, the jamming is already hitting the lower decks. If you don't let me through, you're going to be the first thing Thorn melts down for scrap when he takes over. Do we have a problem, or are you going to let me do my job?" The droid's sensor flickered to blue. It was a gamble. In the military, we called this social engineering, a fancy way of saying I was lying through my teeth with enough confidence to confuse a computer. "Proceed, Courier Voss. Access granted for 5 minutes." The blast doors hissed open. I didn't wait for a second invitation. I practically fell into the core room. The Cortex Core was a masterpiece of Ethelgard engineering. It was a massive cylinder of synapse glass, 30 meters tall, glowing with a soft, pulsing azure light. Thousands of data filaments ran into it, looking like a glowing nervous system. This was the brain of the Silver Line. It managed the planetary shields, the trade manifests, and the cultural archives of an entire civilization. And right now it was flickering. The blue light was being choked out by jagged streaks of red static. I ran to the primary interface console. My hands were shaking. I wasn't a technician. I was a guy who moved boxes from point A to point B, but as a Void Runner, you learn how to hotwire a fusion drive in a dark-side blizzard, or you don't live to see your 31st birthday. I pulled the lead-shielded canister from my belt and twisted the cap. The synapse glass crystal inside was beautiful, a jagged shard of translucent violet that seemed to vibrate in my hand. "Okay, Vespera," I whispered. "Let's see what you're so afraid of." As I slotted the crystal into the interface port, the world didn't just change, it exploded. I wasn't standing in the core room anymore. I was standing in a memory. The synapse glass wasn't just a container for security codes, it was a reservoir of raw, unfiltered emotion. Because the crystal was designed to interface with the human mind, the moment I touched the terminal, the connection bypassed the console and slammed directly into my own neural net. I saw a girl, barely 7 years old, sitting in a cold stone room while a tutor lectured her on the burden of the crown. I felt the crushing weight of her loneliness, a cold, suffocating blanket that never lifted. I felt her fear when her father died, the sudden, sharp realization that she was now the only thing standing between her people and the void. But more than that, I felt the moment she decided to cut it all out. I saw Vespera standing before this very console 3 months ago. She was crying, real jagged tears that left salt streaks on her silver robes. She was terrified of the marriage to Thorn. She knew he would use her feelings, her empathy, and her love for her people as a lever to break her. So she did the unthinkable. She used the Cortex Echo to extract her vulnerability. She stripped away her fear, her joy, and her hesitation, leaving behind a cold, efficient machine of a ruler. The package isn't the codes, I realized, my own eyes stinging as the memories flooded through me. She is the package. She delivered her own soul to me because she couldn't carry it herself. The static from the jamming pulse hit the interface, and the memory fractured. I was thrown back into the core room, gasping for air, the cold titanium floor pressing against my cheek. The violet crystal was glowing fiercely now, fighting against the red corruption of the iron line signal. The terminal screamed a warning. Neural sync interrupted. Security protocols engaged. Data corruption imminent. No, 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 I growled, pulling myself up to the console. You are not flatlining on me now. I have a delivery guarantee. I bypassed the safety locks, my fingers flying across the holographic keys. I wasn't just uploading data. I was trying to stitch a broken person back together. I could feel the Iron Line's virus clawing at the system, a digital predator trying to kill the light. Come on, Vespera, I muttered, my sweat dripping onto the glass interface. You wanted someone who wouldn't look inside? Sorry, Your Grace, but you can't lead a people if you can't feel their heartbeat. You're going to have to be brave enough to be scared again. I slammed my palm against the execute command. The violet light surged. It didn't just fill the room, it screamed upward through the spire, a pillar of pure, unfiltered identity. The red static shattered. The humming of the scrubbers returned to a steady, healthy thrum. My scanner chimed. Delivery status. Confirmed. Signature received. But the signature wasn't a digital thumbprint. It was a silent, psychic echo of a woman's voice, whispering a single word into the back of my mind. Thank you. The blast doors behind me blew open with a deafening crack of thermal paste explosives. I hit the floor, my ears ringing, as 4 soldiers in Iron Line combat suits stormed into the room, their pulse rifles leveled at my head. Package is delivered, boys, I said, raising my hands and offering them a bloody lopsided grin. But I think you're going to find the return policy is a real bitch. Back in the Grand Hall, the silence was no longer a weapon of the elite. It was the silence of a tomb. The lights had dimmed to a ghostly emergency amber. The music had stopped, replaced by the heavy, rhythmic thumping of Iron Line boots as Lord Thorne's personal guard moved to surround the royal dais. The guests were huddled together, their vocal lace collars glowing with the frantic, strobing white of pure panic. Lord Thorne stood in the center of the platform, his ceremonial blade now held unsheathed in his hand. He looked like a man who had already won. He turned to Vespera, his voice amplified by his own collar to reach every corner of the room. It seems the Silver Line's incompetence has finally caught up with them, Thorne declared, his tone dripping with a mock sympathy that made my skin crawl from miles away. A security breach in the spire. Communications are down. The Exarch is clearly unable to maintain the safety of this citadel. By the laws of the Iron-Silver Accord, I am declaring a state of emergency. I am taking command for the protection of us all. Vespera stood as still as a statue. To the nobles, she looked like the same icy ruler she had been all evening. But something had changed. The air around her was vibrating. In the spire, I was currently being zip-tied by an Iron Line soldier, who was roughly the size of a small moon. He shoved me against the console, his rifle butt digging into my kidneys. "Keep your mouth shut, runner," he growled. "Hard to do when you're ruining my jacket," I muttered, my eyes fixed on the terminal. The violet light was still there, hidden beneath the surface of the system. I had delivered the memories, but the integration wasn't instant. It was a slow burn upload. I looked at the soldier. "You know, you guys really overplayed your hand. You think jamming the comms is enough? You forgot about the hard lines." "The hard lines are dead," the soldier scoffed. "We fried the logic gates 10 minutes ago." "Yeah? Well, you didn't fry the Courier," I said. In the hall, Vespera took a step forward. It wasn't the measured, rehearsed step of an exarch. It was the step of a woman who felt every ounce of the cold floor beneath her feet. She looked at Thorne, and for the first time in years, her eyes were bright with something other than calculation. They were bright with fury and fear and an overwhelming, radiant hope. "The emergency is of your own making, Thorne," she said. Her voice didn't need an amplifier. It was raw. It was human. It was thick with the emotions she had tried to bury in a lead-shielded canister. The guests gasped. The vocal lace on Vespera's neck began to glow, not with the polite, artificial colors of the court, but with a wild, swirling vortex of violet and gold. "Your Grace?" Coordinator Valen whispered, stepping back in shock. "What are you doing?" "I am remembering who I am," Vespera replied. She turned to the crowd, her gaze sweeping over the faces of the nobles, the servants, and the terrified diplomats. Lord Thorn believes that power is something you seize through static and blades. He believes that to lead is to be a machine. He wanted me cold. He wanted me broken so he could fill the empty space with his own shadow. Thorn's face twisted into a snarl. Enough of this nonsense. You are hysterical. Guards escort the exarch to her private chambers for her own safety. The Iron Line soldiers moved in, but Vespera didn't flinch. She reached up and tore the silver crown from her head, throwing it onto the obsidian floor. The crystalline glass shattered into 1,000 pieces. "I am not hysterical," she shouted, her voice echoing with a power that shook the very foundations of the citadel. "I am awake, and I can feel every single one of you. I can feel your fear of the Iron Line's greed. I can feel your hunger for a peace that isn't built on lies. I am the Silver Line, and my blood is your blood." As she spoke, the violet light from the spire finally reached the hall. Every light fixture, every floor tile, every synapse glass pillar erupted into a brilliant, blinding purple glow. The planetary defense grid didn't just come back online, it roared to life. High above the atmosphere, the Silver Line's orbital platforms swiveled, their targeting arrays locking onto the Iron Line's cloaked transport ships with surgical precision. Inside the Citadel, the doors didn't just lock, they sealed. Thorn's pulse emitters didn't just fail, they overloaded, sending a shower of sparks into the air as the jamming signal was eaten alive by the violet resonance. In the spire, the soldier holding me jumped back as the console erupted in a flash of light. "What did you do?" he screamed, raising his rifle. "I completed the delivery," I said, dropping to the floor and sweeping his legs out from under him with a move I'd learned in a bar fight on Nixara Station. "And I think the customer is very satisfied." I rolled to the side, grabbing a discarded vibro wrench from the maintenance floor. It wasn't a pulse rifle, but in the hands of a man who spent 12 hours a day turning bolts, it was a heavy hitter. I swung it into the knee of the second soldier, hearing the satisfying crunch of armor and bone. "Check 6, boys," I yelled as the sentry droids from earlier, now glowing with the same violet light, stormed back into the room. Their programming had been overridden by the Central Core. They weren't peacekeepers anymore. They were Vespera's guardians. "Threat detected," the lead droid droned, its lasers powering up with a high-pitched whine. "Iron Line insurgents identified. Neutralizing." I didn't stay to watch the fireworks. I had a wedding reception to get back to, and I was pretty sure the bar was still open. Back in the hall, the situation had shifted from a coup to a rout. The Iron Line guards, seeing their technology fail and their leader humiliated, began to retreat. Thorn was left standing alone on the dais, his face pale, his blade trembling. Vespera walked toward him. She wasn't the icy statue anymore. She was a woman who looked like she had just survived a shipwreck, her hair messy, her robes torn, and her face wet with tears. But she had never looked more like a queen. "You thought my heart was a weakness, Thorn," she said, stopping inches from his blade. "You thought that by forcing me to choose between my feelings and my people, I would choose to be nothing. But you were wrong. My heart is the only thing that makes me worth following." She reached out and gripped the edge of his blade with her bare hand. The silver silk of her sleeve turned red, but she didn't blink. She didn't flinch. "The bonding is over," she said. "Leave my world, before I decide to show you exactly how much anger I've been keeping in that crystal." Thorn looked into her eyes and saw a courage he couldn't comprehend. A courage that wasn't the absence of fear, but the absolute terrifying acceptance of it. He dropped his sword. He didn't say a word. He just turned and fled, his guards following him like beaten dogs. The hall remained silent for a long beat. Then slowly, a single servant, a young man in a stained tunic, began to clap. Then another. Then the Duchess with the green lace. Within seconds, the Silver Citadel was roaring with a sound that hadn't been heard in a generation. It wasn't the polite applause of a court. It was the sound of a people seeing their leader for the first time. I stepped through the back doors of the hall, leaning heavily on the vibro wrench, my jacket now missing a sleeve, and my face covered in soot. I looked up at the dais. Vespera turned. She found me in the crowd, despite the hundreds of nobles between us. She didn't smile. Not yet, but the look she gave me was worth more than 100,000 marks. It was the look of a person who finally recognized herself. I held up my delivery scanner one last time. "Everything arrived in one piece, Your Grace," I called out, my voice raspy but steady. She finally smiled. It was a small, fragile thing, but it lit up the room more than the synapse glass ever could. "Thank you, Kaelen boss," she said, her voice carrying across the silent hall. "You are quite the cavalier." "I am just the delivery guy," I muttered to myself, finally letting the exhaustion take hold. "But I think I'll take that fuel tank upgrade now." The Silver Citadel didn't look so silver anymore. In the 3 hours since the violet pulse had shattered Thorne's coup, the Grand Hall had transformed into a field hospital for broken egos and bruised bodies. The manufactured spring scent was gone, replaced by the sharp ozone tang of discharged capacitors and the metallic smell of blood. I sat on the edge of the royal dais, my legs dangling over the obsidian platform where Vespera had nearly lost her world. I was nursing a lukewarm cup of synth caf that tasted like battery acid, but it was the only thing keeping my eyes from welding shut. My jacket was a total loss. One sleeve was missing entirely, and the other was scorched black from a near miss with a pulse rifle. I looked like something the star skimmer would have sucked into its intake vents on a bad day. "You look like hell, Voss," a voice rasped from behind me. I didn't need to turn around to know it was Package. That was the nickname I'd given to the lead droid, the Mark IV peacekeeper that had decided I was its new best friend. Its chassis was dented, and one of its optical sensors was flickering with a rhythmic, annoying click, but it was still standing. Beside it stood Signature, the second droid, looking equally battered but functional. "And you look like a toaster that lost a fight with a trash compactor," I countered, taking a grimacing sip of the caf. "Status report?" "Citadel perimeter is secure," Package droned. "Iron Line remnants have retreated to the northern docking bays. They've engaged their sublight drives and cleared the atmosphere. We counted 42 casualties on their side, mostly due to the sentry override you triggered. On our side, 7 guards are KIA and 12 are in the medbay." KIA, killed in action. 3 letters that sounded way too clean for the mess I'd seen in the corridors. I looked down at my hands. They were still shaking. I'd spent my life avoiding the crossfire, delivering packages to the people who fought the wars, rather than fighting them myself. But tonight I'd crossed a line. I wasn't just a witness anymore. I was a participant. "Where is she?" I asked. "The Exarch is in the private sanctuary," Signature replied. "She has requested your presence. Alone." I sighed, pushing myself off the dais. My knees popped with a sound like dry twigs snapping. Great. More royal drama. Just once, I'd like to deliver a package and have the customer just say thanks and give me a tip. The walk to the sanctuary was long and quiet. The violet glow had faded to a soft, lingering luminescence in the walls, but the spire felt different. It felt alive, but in a way that was almost painful, like a limb that had been asleep for years and was now screaming as the blood rushed back in. I found Vespera standing by a floor-to-ceiling window that looked out over the twilight ring. The city below was a sprawling web of lights, caught between the permanent day of the sun side and the eternal night of the dark side. She had changed out of her torn robes into a simple charcoal gray tunic. She looked smaller without the silver silk and the glass crown. More fragile. When she turned to face me, I saw the true cost of the delivery. Her eyes were red-rimmed, and her vocal lace was flickering with a low, mournful blue. Now that the adrenaline had worn off, the years of repressed grief, loneliness, and terror were hitting her all at once. It was a psychic landslide, and she was buried under it. "I can't stop it, Kaelen," she whispered. Her voice was thin, stripped of its royal authority. "The memories. They're not just data. They're feelings. I remember the day my father's ship vanished into the rift. I can feel the exact moment the light went out in his eyes. I can feel the weight of every lie I've told to keep this house from falling apart. It's too much. It's too loud." I stood there, feeling like a complete skag in my ruined jacket. I wasn't an advisor. I wasn't a therapist. I was a guy who knew how to secure a crate of volatile chemicals in a high-gravity storm. "You're having a panic attack, Vespera," I said, my voice unintentionally gruff. It's what happens when you try to swallow an ocean all at once. You need to breathe. Just focus on the air going in and out. I made a mistake, she said, her voice rising with a frantic edge. I thought if I got my memories back, I would be strong. I thought I would know what to do. But I'm terrified. I look at Thorn, and I don't see a political enemy anymore. I see a man who wants to burn my world to the ground, and I'm scared I can't stop him. I should have left the crystal in the canister. I should have stayed cold. She slumped against the glass, her shoulders shaking. This was the test. The theme of my life had always been about staying out of the way, about surviving by being invisible. But looking at her, I realized that if she broke now, the whole system would follow. The courage she'd shown on the dais was a spark, but sparks die out if nobody feeds the fire. I walked over to her, stopping just a few feet away. I didn't touch her. That was way above my pay grade. But I stayed in her orbit. Listen to me, I said, and for once I wasn't trying to be funny. I've been flying the void for 15 years. You know what the scariest part of a flight is? It's not the pirates. It's not the engine failure. It's the moment you realize you're in the middle of a nebula and you can't see the stars. You feel like you're stationary, even when you're moving at 10,000 kilometers an hour. You lose your sense of up and down. You feel like the universe is pressing in on you from all sides. She looked up at me, her amber eyes wet with tears. What do you do then? You trust your instruments, I said. You don't trust your eyes, and you definitely don't trust your gut. You look at the dials, you look at the telemetry. You trust the things you know are true even when they don't feel true. So what are my instruments, Kaelen? I'm a queen of a house that hates me and a world that's about to go to war. Your instrument is the fact that you care, I said. Thorn isn't scared. That's why he's a monster. He doesn't feel the weight, so he doesn't care who he crushes. You're terrified because you know what's at stake. That fear, that's your compass. It tells you that what you're doing matters. Courage isn't about being a statue, Vespera. It's about being a mess, being absolutely petrified, and then deciding to do the job anyway. She was silent for a long time, the only sound being the distant hum of the Citadel's life support. Slowly, she stood up straight. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, a gesture so common and unroyal that it hit me harder than any of her speeches. You're a very strange man, Kaelen Voss, she said, her voice regaining a bit of its iron. You speak like a philosopher, but you look like a grease monkey. I'm a delivery driver, I reminded her. And speaking of deliveries, we have a problem. Package and Signature found something on the Iron Line soldiers we took down in the Spire. I pulled a small, jagged black box from my pocket. It was an obsidian link, a high-level encryption device used by the shadow ops of the inner systems. Thorn wasn't acting alone, I said, my face darkening. This device was pinging a signal to a location inside the Twilight Ring, not a military base, a civilian sector, specifically the old docks. Vespera frowned. The old docks were decommissioned 20 years ago. There's nothing there but smugglers and scrap dealers. And a perfect place to hide something you don't want the Silver Line to see, I added. I ran a trace on the frequency. It's a terraforming override signal. Thorn isn't just trying to take over the Citadel. He's planted something in the city's atmospheric scrubbers. If he can't have Kalthura, he's going to flip the switch and let the sunside fire flood the ring. Within 6 hours, the temperature will rise by 40 degrees Celsius. Everyone in the city will be cooked alive. Vespera's vocal lace turned a sharp, panicked yellow. We have to warn the city council. We have to send the guards. No, I said, shaking my head. The council is full of Thorn's cronies, and the guards are too slow. They'll see them coming a mile away and trigger the override early. We need to go in quiet. We need someone who knows the docks, someone who can move through the shadows without being noticed. Vespera looked at me, then at the city below. She took a deep breath, and I could see the moment she made the choice. She was scared. I could see it in the way her fingers trembled, but she wasn't letting it steer the ship anymore. I'm coming with you, she said. Your Grace, with all due respect. That is a terrible idea, I said. You've never been to the old docks. It's not exactly a walk in the park. It's more like a walk through a shark tank with meat in your pockets. I spent 3 months trying to be a queen who felt nothing, she said, her eyes burning with a new fierce light. Now I want to be a queen who actually sees her people. I'm not staying in this spire while my city burns. You said courage is doing the job even when you're petrified? Well, Kaelen, I'm petrified. Let's go. I looked at her for a long second, then gave a short, sharp nod. All right, but we're doing this my way. You need a jacket that isn't charcoal gray, and we're going to need to lose the guards, except for the clankers. Package and signature are coming with us. I've grown fond of having a tactical toaster at my back. Agreed, she said. One more thing, I said as we headed for the door. If we die, I'm definitely charging your estate for the hazard pay. 100,000 marks was for a wedding. Stopping a planetary meltdown? That's at least double. She actually laughed then, a genuine bell-like sound that echoed through the sanctuary. If we survive, Kaelen, I'll buy you a new ship, one that doesn't smell like engine grease. Hey, the Star Skimmer has character, I grumbled, but I was smiling too. We headed for the service lifts, leaving the safety of the Silver Citadel behind. The real fight was just beginning, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't looking for the exit. I was looking for the target. The transition from the Silver Citadel to the old docks was like stepping out of a dream and face first into a gutter. We had taken a cargo elevator down to the sublevels, bypassing the main gates where Thorn's spies were likely still lurking. I'd managed to scavenge a couple of oversized oil-stained jumpsuits for Vesper and myself. She'd tucked her long silver hair into a grimy cap, and with a bit of engine soot smeared across her cheekbones, she almost looked like a common scrapper. Almost. She still walked like she owned the floor, a habit that was going to get us zeroed if she wasn't careful. Keep your head down, Your Grace, I whispered as we stepped onto the mag rail platform of the Twilight Sector. And for the love of the stars, stop looking at the trash like it's an ancient artifact. It's just trash. I've never seen so much of it, she murmured, her voice muffled by the collar of her jumpsuit. The Citadel's waste management systems are... I suppose I never thought about where it all went. Welcome to the other side of the manifest, I said. The stuff the glints don't want to see ends up here. It's the same on every planet. The higher the spire, the deeper the pit. The mag rail was crowded with workers heading home from the midnight shifts, miners from the sunside, hydroponic techs from the nurseries, and a few dozen weary-looking drifters. The air was thick with the smell of cheap synth tobacco and unwashed bodies. Package and signature stood behind us, their heavy cloaks concealing their droid chassis. To any casual observer, they were just two very large, very quiet bodyguards. We got off at the Junction 42 station, a crumbling concrete hub that felt like it was being held together by rust and prayer. This was my territory. I'd spent countless nights in the bars around here, trading delivery routes for tips on where the best black market fuel was hidden. We need to find Jax, I said, navigating the narrow neon-lit alleys of the old docks. He's the best scrapper in the sector. If anyone knows what Thorn has been hauling into the atmospheric scrubbers, it's him. We turned a corner and were greeted by a wall of sound, the rhythmic pounding of industrial hammers and the high-pitched whine of plasma cutters. Jax's workshop was a cavernous space filled with the carcasses of dead ships and piles of salvaged tech. A massive man with a cybernetic arm was hunched over a fusion manifold, sparks showering his grease-covered apron. He didn't look up when we approached. "We're closed, Voss," he grunted, his voice sounding like two stones grinding together. "Unless you've got that cooling coil you promised me 3 weeks ago." "I've got something better, Jax," I said, leaning against a stack of crates. "I've got a problem that's going to make your cooling coil irrelevant. Like, everyone in the city turns to ash irrelevant." Jax stopped hammering and slowly straightened up. He wiped his brow with a rag that was blacker than the dark side and turned his one organic eye toward me. Then he looked at Vespra. He squinted, his gaze lingering on her for a second too long. "You're hanging out with a high-class crowd these days, Kaelen," he said, his voice dropping an octave. "She doesn't belong here. Her skin's too clean." "She's with me," I said firmly, "and she's paying. In marks, not credits." Jax spit on the floor. "All right, what's the sit rep?" I pulled out the obsidian link. "Thorn's boys have been busy. They've tapped into the main scrubber hub in Sector 7. I need to know what they put in there." Jax's face went pale, a feat considering the amount of grime on it. He took the black box and turned it over in his hands. Sector 7? That's been a restricted zone for the last month. Iron line guards everywhere. I thought they were just upgrading the filters. They were upgrading the filters to deliver a terraforming virus, Vesper said, stepping forward. She didn't use her royal voice, but the authority was still there, vibrating in her vocal lace. If it triggers, the atmosphere in the ring will desync. The heat from the sun's side will flood in. How do we stop it? Jax looked at her, then back at me. Kaelen, who is this? She's the person who's going to make sure your shop doesn't melt, I said. Just answer the question, Jax. We're on a clock. Jax sighed and walked over to a cluttered terminal. He punched in a few commands, and a holographic map of the old docks flickered to life. The scrubber hub is located 300 meters below the surface. It's a pressurized chamber. To get in, you need a biometric override from the Citadel, which I'm guessing you don't have, or you have to go through the cooling vents. The cooling vents are 300 degrees Celsius when the scrubbers are running, I noted. That's a suicide mission. Not if you shut them down first, Jack said, but the manual shutoff is inside the Iron Line's temporary barracks. They've turned the old pumping station into a fortress. At least 50 soldiers, pulse turrets, the works. You try to waltz in there, and you'll be KIA before you hit the door. I looked at Vespera. Her face was grim, but she didn't look like she was going to faint. She was processing the data, looking at the logistics just like I'd taught her. What if we don't waltz in, she asked. What if we create a diversion, something big enough to pull the guards away from the pumping station? Like what? I asked. I'm fresh out of planetary-scale distractions. The Star Skimmer, she said, looking at me. It's still at the Citadel docks, isn't it? Yeah, but it's under lockdown, I said. Not if I authorize its release, she said. We can remote pilot it. If we fly it over the old docks and simulate an engine failure, a big, loud, messy one, every Iron Line soldier in the sector will be falling over themselves to secure the Exarch's courier ship. They'll think it's a desperate escape attempt. I felt a pang of protectiveness for my ship. You want to use my ship as bait? She's a vintage model, Vespera. You can't just throw her at a bunch of Thorn's goons. You said she had character, Kaelen, Vespera said, a hint of a challenge in her eyes. Let her show it. We'll set the autopilot to hover over the bay. It won't crash. It'll just look like it's about to. It's a solid play, Jax admitted. While they're busy with the ship, I can get you through the service tunnels. But once you're inside the hub, it's all on you. If Thorn's virus has already started the countdown, you'll have maybe 10 minutes to purge the system. Then we'd better get moving, I said, feeling the heat already starting to rise in my chest, though that might just have been the stress. We left Jax's workshop and headed for the service tunnels. As we moved through the dark, damp passages, the reality of what we were doing started to settle in. We were 4 people, well, 2 people and 2 droids, going up against a small army to save a city that didn't even know it was in danger. Are you still petrified? I whispered to Vespera as we paused at a junction to let a patrol of Iron Line droids pass above us. Yes, she said softly. Her hand found mine in the dark. It was cold, but her grip was firm. But I realized something back there, in the workshop. What's that? My father always said that a ruler is a servant who wears a crown. I thought he meant it was a job, but looking at Jax, seeing how hard he works just to keep his little corner of the world running, I realized that being a queen means being responsible for his breath, for his life. I'm not just scared for myself anymore, Kaelen. I'm scared for them, and that's different. That's the courage I was talking about, I said. It's not about being fearless. It's about finding something you care about more than your own skin. We reached the end of the tunnel, which opened into a massive, echoing chamber filled with the roar of falling water. This was the pumping station. Across the chasm, I could see the Iron Line barracks, a brutalist structure of dark steel, swarming with soldiers. All right, I said, pulling out my comms unit. Package, you have the remote link to the Star Skimmer? Link established, the droid replied. Autopilot is standing by. On your command, I will initiate the engine failure sequence. Do it, I said. A few kilometers away, high up at the Citadel docks, the Star Skimmer's engines roared to life. I watched the telemetry on my scanner as my beautiful, battered ship lurched into the air. Smoke emitters, which I'd installed for a very different purpose involving a narrow escape from a trade dispute, pouring out thick black clouds. It looked like a dying bird as it banked toward the old docks. Below us, the Iron Line barracks erupted into activity. Alarms blared, and dozens of soldiers scrambled for their transports, heading toward the bay where the ship seemed destined to crash. "The nest is empty," I said, checking the thermal sensors. "Most of them are gone. We have maybe 15 minutes before they realize it's a ghost ship." "Let's go," Vesper said. We moved with practiced efficiency. Package and Signature took the lead, their heavy weapons finally out and ready. We crossed the service bridge, bypassing the main gate, and slipped into the barracks. The interior was a maze of cold steel and flickering lights. We found the manual shutoff for the cooling vents in a small, cramped control room. I slammed the lever down, hearing the distant groan of massive turbines coming to a halt. "Cooling vents are down," I said. "Now for the fun part. We have to climb down into the scrubber hub." The vents were a vertical shaft, 5 meters wide, lined with jagged heat sinks. Even with the power off, the air inside was a stifling 50 degrees Celsius. We started the descent, using magnetic tethers to slide down the walls. My heart was hammering against my ribs. Every noise sounded like a pulse rifle charging up. Every shadow looked like a soldier waiting to pounce. We reached the bottom of the shaft and stepped into the hub. It was a massive spherical room, dominated by 3 huge tanks of atmospheric gas. In the center was a small, high-tech rig that definitely didn't belong to the Silver Line. It was humming with a low, sinister vibration. "There it is," Vesper said, pointing to the rig. "The terraforming override." I ran to the console. It was locked with a biometric scanner that required an Iron Line officer's thumbprint. "I can't get in," I hissed. "The encryption is too high. It'll take me hours to bypass." "Move," Vespera said. She stepped up to the console and pulled a small silver dagger from her belt, the same one she'd used to cut her hand back in the hall. "What are you doing?" I asked. "Thorn used my DNA to calibrate his override," she said. "He wanted to be sure that even if I survived the wedding, he could use my own genetic code as the key to destroy the city." He thought it was a poetic irony. She pressed her thumb against the scanner, her blood still fresh on her skin. The console chirped. "Access granted. Override sequence initiated." "It's working," I yelled. "Purge the tanks, Vespera. Open the vents and let the virus bleed out into the cooling water. It'll be neutralized by the salts." She didn't hesitate. She slammed her hand onto the purge command. The room groaned as the massive valves opened. A thick, gray mist began to swirl out of the tanks, sucked down into the cooling pipes below. The humming from the rig stopped, replaced by a low, defeated whine. "Delivery canceled," I said, leaning against the tank, my lungs burning from the heat. "We did it, but we weren't alone." "An impressive performance, Exarch," a voice echoed through the chamber. I spun around, my vibro wrench ready. Lord Thorn was standing in the doorway of the hub, his face a mask of cold, calculating fury. He wasn't alone. 6 of his elite shadow guards stood behind him, their rifles aimed directly at us. "I expected you to hide in your spire like a frightened child," Thorn said, stepping into the room. "But it seems the Courier has been a bad influence on you. You've developed a sense of heroics. It's a shame. It's going to make your death so much more painful." I looked at Package and Signature. They were positioned near the vents, their weapons leveled at Thorn's guards. But we were outnumbered and outgunned. "Thorn, it's over," Vespera said, her voice steady. "The virus is neutralized. The city is safe. Give it up." "The city was just a distraction, Vespera," Thorn said, a cruel smile touching his lips. "I don't need to burn the ring if I can just kill the Queen. Without you, the Silver Line collapses. The Obsidian Circle will move in to restore order, and I will be the one who leads them." He raised his hand, signaling his guards to fire. This was it, the moment I'd spent my whole life running away from. I looked at Vespera. She was scared. I could see the pulse jumping in her neck, but she wasn't moving. She was standing her ground, and if she could be brave, so could I. "Hey, Thorn!" I yelled, pulling a small silver object from my pocket. It was the detonator for the Star Skimmer's cargo bay. "You remember my ship, the one your boys are so busy trying to capture?" Thorn frowned. "What of it?" "I forgot to mention," I said, a wild, reckless grin spreading across my face. "I was hauling a shipment of volatile plasma cells for a client on the Sunside. And I just set the timer to 3 seconds. Thorn's eyes went wide. You're bluffing. 1, 2, I counted. A massive explosion rocked the Citadel docks miles above us. Even down here, 300 meters underground, we felt the shockwave. The Star Skimmer, my beautiful, loyal ship, had just gone out in a blaze of glory, taking half of the Iron Line's docking bay with it. The distraction was enough. Package and Signature opened fire, the violet bolts from their rifles tearing through the shadows. Down, I yelled, grabbing Vespera and pulling her behind one of the atmospheric tanks. The room erupted into chaos. Pulse fire hissed through the air, reflecting off the Synapse glass walls. Thorn's guards were elite, but they weren't used to fighting in a pressurized hub against 2 battle-hardened droids and a courier who had nothing left to lose. I saw Thorn trying to slip away through the service exit. Not this time, you scag, I growled. I didn't think. I didn't plan. I just ran. I tackled him just as he reached the door, the weight of my Durasteel-toed boots sending us both crashing into the metal floor. We tumbled down a short flight of stairs, landing in a heap in the corridor outside. Thorn was stronger than he looked. He slammed an elbow into my ribs, knocking the wind out of me. He scrambled for his blade, the silver steel gleaming in the emergency lights. You're nothing, boss, he hissed, his face inches from mine. A commoner, a piece of trash playing at being a hero. Maybe, I gasped, my hand finding the heavy vibro wrench in my belt. But I'm the trash that just delivered your eviction notice. I swung the wrench with everything I had. It caught him on the side of the head, a dull, heavy thud that ended the conversation. Thorn went limp, his blade clattering to the floor. I lay there for a second, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst through my chest. My ribs felt like they were on fire, and I was pretty sure I'd lost a tooth. Kaelen! Vespera appeared at the top of the stairs, her face pale and streaked with soot. She ran down to me, her hands hovering over my face. Are you all right? Are you hurt? I've been better, I wheezed, trying to sit up. But I think the Iron Line just had its manifest canceled. She looked at the unconscious Thorn, then back at me. Slowly, she leaned forward and pressed her forehead against mine. It wasn't a royal gesture. It was just 2 people who had survived the dark together. You saved them, Kaelen, she whispered. You saved the city. We saved the city, I corrected her. But I'm still charging you for the ship. That was a vintage Mark II, Vespera. You don't just find those in every scrapyard. She laughed, and this time it was a sound of pure, unadulterated relief. Consider it done, Royal Council Voss. I'll get you the best ship in the galaxy. Royal Council? I asked, raising an eyebrow. Is that a promotion? Does it come with health insurance? It comes with everything, she said, her eyes shining, including a partner who finally knows what her instruments are. We stood up together, 2 messy, terrified, and incredibly brave people, and walked out of the old docks and into the light of a new Kalthura. The war wasn't over. The Obsidian Circle was still out there. But for the first time, the manifest for the future actually looked promising. The silence that followed the destruction of the Star Skimmer was the heaviest thing I had ever carried. Even back at the Citadel, surrounded by the hum of victory and the sight of Lord Thorn being dragged to the deepest, darkest hole in the sublevels, the air felt thin. We had saved the city from a thermal meltdown, yes, but in the world of high-stakes logistics, every delivery has a customs fee. And the customs fee for humiliating a noble house was usually paid in blood in political fallout. I was standing in the command center of the Spire, staring at a holographic display that showed a cluster of massive blade-shaped silhouettes entering the Kalthura system. They weren't Iron Line. They weren't Silver Line. These were ships of the Obsidian Circle, the imperial authority that kept the peace between the great houses with the same gentle touch as a tectonic plate. They were coming to mediate. In my experience, when the Obsidian Circle says they want to mediate, it means they've already decided who's going to be executed, and they're just arriving to pick out the blindfolds. 6 capital ships, I muttered, my voice raspy. My ribs were still taped up, and every breath felt like a dull knife was twisting in my chest. 200 support fighters. That is a lot of firepower for a diplomatic visit. They are not here for a visit, Kaelen, Vesper said. She was standing beside me, her silver robes replaced by a sharp, military-cut tunic of deep violet. She looked like a queen again, but not the icy one I'd met at the wedding. There was a tremor in her hands that she wasn't trying to hide anymore. She was feeling the weight of the 300,000 lives in the Twilight Ring, and it was nearly crushing her. Legate Valerius is on the lead ship. He was my father's rival. He believes that emotions are a biological defect that should be purged from the ruling class. Sounds like a real ray of sunshine, I said, trying to find a bit of that protective sarcasm that usually served as my armor. What's the sit rep on our own defenses? Non-existent, Vespera replied, her vocal lace glowing a dim, flickering gray. The planetary shields are at 20%. The guards are exhausted. If Valerius decides to drop his shock troops, we won't last an hour. He's going to use Thorn's rebellion as an excuse to declare Kalthura an imperial protectorate. I'll be removed, and a steward will be appointed. And what happens to the delivery guy who kicked the hornet's nest? Vespera turned to me, her amber eyes wide and full of a terrifying honesty. He'll want you turned over for trial. Interstellar law forbids commoners from interfering in the internal affairs of the High Lines. You're a hero to the docks, Kaelen, but to the Circle, you're an infection. I looked at the ships on the screen. I could feel the old urge to bug out, to find a shuttle and disappear into the dark side wastes before the legate's boots hit the ground. I had 100,000 marks in an encrypted account now. I could buy a new ship, a better ship, and be halfway to the Orion Nebula before anyone noticed I was gone. It was the smart move, the survivalist move. But then I looked at the violet light still pulsing in the walls of the spire. I thought about Jax in his scrapyard, and the young servant who had started the applause, and the way Vespera had pressed her forehead against mine in the dark of the old docks. I'm not a fan of trials, I said, my voice steadying. The food is terrible, and the legal fees are a skag, so I guess we'd better make sure it doesn't get that far. How? Valerius doesn't negotiate with feelings, and he certainly won't negotiate with a courier? He doesn't have to negotiate with me, I said, a reckless idea starting to take shape in my mind. He has to negotiate with the system. You said he values order? Well, let's show him that the only thing keeping this planet from descending into absolute, unorderly chaos is you and your inappropriate advisory network. The comms array chimed, a deep, resonant tone that signaled an Imperial-level broadcast. A holographic image flickered to life in the center of the room. Legate Valerius was a man who looked like he had been carved out of volcanic rock. His face was a map of cold lines, and his eyes were as black as the obsidian ships he commanded. Exarch Vespera, Valerius said, his voice a low, mechanical rumble. We have received reports of significant civil unrest, a failed coup, and the involvement of unauthorized civilian elements in the management of your planetary defenses. This is an unacceptable breach of Imperial protocol. Legate, Vesper said, her voice holding a regal dignity that made me proud to stand behind her. The situation is under control. Lord Thorn has been detained, and the threat to the city has been neutralized. Neutralized by a common runner, Valerius countered, his gaze shifting to me with the clinical detachment of a scientist looking at a slide. I am informed that a man named Kaelen Voss is currently acting as your vow-bearer and primary advisor. This is a mockery of our traditions. I am arriving at the Silver Citadel in 2 hours. You will have Lord Thorn ready for transfer to Imperial custody. You will also have the civilian, Voss, detained and ready for interrogation. Voss is under my personal protection, Vespera stated. Your protection is currently worth very little, Exarch, Valerius said, and the image vanished. The room went cold. Package and Signature, who had been standing guard by the door, shifted their weight, their metal joints clicking in the silence. 2 hours, I said, looking at the countdown on my scanner. That's not enough time to build a fleet, but it's just enough time to deliver a message. Kaelen, what are you doing? Vespera asked as I started punching commands into the console. I'm calling in some favors, I said. Every courier, every scrapper, and every dock worker I've ever known is currently watching the sky. They're scared, Vespera, and when people like us get scared, we get stubborn. I'm going to show the legate that if he takes you out, he doesn't just get a planet, he gets a logistical nightmare that will take him 100 years to untangle. I opened a wideband channel, bypassing the official royal frequencies. I used the old gritty slang of the Void Runners, the language of people who knew how to make things move when the universe said no. "This is Voss," I said into the mic. "Listen up, all you scumbags, scrappers, and skyhounds. The Obsidian Circle is here to check our manifests. They think we're just grease on the gears. They think they can take the Exarch and treat Kalthura like a strip mine. I say we show them what happens when the gears stop turning. If you can hear me, it's time to go dark. No signatures, no deliveries, no maintenance. If it moves, park it. If it glows, turn it off. Let's show the legate what real order looks like without us." I closed the channel and looked at Vespera. She was staring at me, her mouth slightly open. "You just called for a planetary strike," she whispered. "I called for a moment of silence," I corrected her. "Now let's go get dressed. We have a legate to disappoint." The grand hall of the Silver Citadel had never felt so vast. The Obsidian Circle had occupied the space with the cold efficiency of a tomb opening. 200 Imperial storm guards stood in perfect, terrifying formation, their black armor absorbing the light like ink. In the center of the hall, Legate Valerius stood behind a floating obsidian-top table, looking like the final judge of humanity. Vespera and I walked toward him. She was wearing her full silver regalia again, but she carried it differently now. It wasn't a shield, it was a statement. I walked beside her wearing a new Courier jacket she'd had the royal tailors whip up in an hour. It was black with silver trim, and for the first time in my life, I had my name embroidered in gold on the chest. I felt like a fraud, but a very well-dressed one. Thorn was there too, held in a stasis field between two Imperial guards. He looked broken, his fine clothes torn, but he still managed to shoot me a look of pure, unadulterated venom. "Exarch," Valerius said, not even acknowledging my presence. "You have delivered the prisoner Thorn. That is acceptable. Now hand over the civilian." "No," Vespera said. The word echoed through the hall, simple and unbreakable. Valerius narrowed his eyes. "You are choosing a commoner over the stability of your house. I have the authority to strip you of your title this second, Vespera. The Obsidian Circle does not tolerate sentimentalism in its rulers." "This isn't sentimentalism, Legate," Vespera said. "It's practical governance. You value order? Then look at your telemetry." Valerius frowned, tapping a command on his table. A holographic map of Kalthura appeared. A few minutes ago, it had been a vibrant web of lights and movement. Now it was going dark. Sector by sector, the Twilight Ring was shutting down. The mag rails had stopped. The automated refineries were silent. The cargo docks, usually the loudest part of the planet, were as quiet as a vacuum. "What is this?" Valerius demanded, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl. "A technical failure?" "It's a strike," I said, stepping forward. I could feel the Imperial guards shifting their rifles toward me, and my heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I was petrified. My knees wanted to turn into jelly, and my palms were sweating inside my new gloves. But I thought about the lesson I'd preached to Vespera. I thought about the courage to act while shaking. Every worker on this planet just walked off the job, Legate. The couriers won't move your supplies. The scrappers won't fix your ships. Even the atmospheric technicians have gone home. "I will simply bring in Imperial labor," Valerius said coldly. "Good luck with that," I countered, leaning against the table with a confidence I absolutely did not feel. "Kalthura is a tidal-lock nightmare. Your Imperial techs don't know the wind patterns. They don't know the thermal surge schedules. They don't know how to keep the dark side frost from cracking the fusion cores. You can occupy the planet, sure, but you'll be sitting in a dark, cold box while your capital ships run out of fuel because nobody's refining the isotopes." Valerius looked at me, then at Vespera. "You allowed this? You allowed a common runner to hold a world hostage?" "I didn't allow it," Vespera said, her vocal lace glowing with a steady, warm violet. "I inspired it. My people are not gears in a machine, Legate. They are a community. They saw what Lord Thorn tried to do, and they saw who stopped him. They saw that I was willing to risk my life in the old docks to save theirs. They're not striking because they hate order. They're striking because they found something they value more than their paychecks. They found a voice." "This is chaos," Valerius spat. "This is the very thing the Obsidian Circle was built to prevent." "No," Vespera said, stepping closer to him. "Chaos is a ruler who doesn't know the names of the people who keep her breathing. Chaos is a lord who views his citizens as data points on a manifest. What you see out there is the most profound kind of order there is. A people acting as one to protect their own. If you take me, Or if you take Kaelen, you're not restoring order. You're breaking the only link that keeps this planet functioning. I watched Valerius. I could see the cold logic of the man fighting against the sheer, undeniable reality of the situation. He was a logistical thinker. He knew that an occupied striking planet was a drain on Imperial resources, not an asset. He knew that the cost of suppressing a global movement of workers was higher than the value of the Silver Line's trade routes. But he also couldn't look weak. "I will not be dictated to by a courier," he said, his hand hovering over a button that would likely signal his guards to open fire. This was the point. The delivery window was closing. "Then don't think of me as a courier," I said, my voice dropping to a low, intense whisper. "Think of me as a risk assessment. I've spent my life calculating the odds of a delivery failing. Right now, the odds of you successfully governing Qualthura without Vespera are 0. You can kill us both. You can glass the city. But you'll still lose, because you can't deliver order to a people who have decided they're no longer for sale." I stood there staring into those black, obsidian eyes. I was terrified. I was absolutely, fundamentally sure that this was the moment I was going to be zeroed. I could practically feel the pulse bolts burning through my new jacket. But I didn't move. I stayed in the gap. Valerius stared at me for what felt like 100 years. The hall was so silent I could hear the rhythmic clicking of the stasis field holding Thorn. Then slowly the legate withdrew his hand from the table. "Exarch Vespera," he said, his voice regaining its mechanical chill. "It appears your planet is uniquely complicated. The Obsidian Circle has no interest in managing a logistical quagmire. We will take custody of Lord Thorn. The Iron Line will be dismantled and its assets will be absorbed by the Imperial Treasury." He paused, his gaze lingering on me for a second. "As for the civilian Voss, since he has been officially designated as your royal counsel, his actions in the Spire fall under the category of sanctioned diplomatic defense. His file will be marked as closed. But be warned, Exarch. If the lights do not come back on in the twilight ring within the hour, my ships will begin their orbital bombardment." "The lights will be on in 10 minutes, Legate," Vesper said, her voice ringing with relief. Valerius turned without another word, his black-armored guards falling into step behind him. They moved like a receding shadow, leaving the hall as quickly as they had arrived. Thorn was hauled away, his screams of protest muffled by the stasis field. As the heavy doors of the Citadel closed behind the Imperial party, Vespera slumped against the obsidian table. She let out a breath that sounded like it had been held for a lifetime. Her vocal lace faded to a soft, exhausted white. "We did it," she whispered. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. My legs had finally decided to follow their original plan of turning into jelly, and I had to grab the edge of the table to keep from face-planting onto the floor. "Kaelen?" she asked, her hand touching my arm. "I'm fine," I wheezed. I think I need to sit down for about 3 years, and I think I'm going to throw up in this very expensive jacket." She laughed, a real shaky laugh, and pulled me into a hug. It wasn't a royal hug. It was the hug of two people who had just looked into the void and told it to go skag itself. "You were incredible," she said into my shoulder. "You stood up to an Imperial legate. You threatened a capital fleet with a moment of silence." "I was petrified, Vespera," I admitted, pulling back to look at her. "My heart was beating so hard I thought it was going to trigger a seismic alert. I almost ran. I almost bug out the back door 3 times. But you didn't," she said, her amber eyes shining with a deep human warmth. "That's the courage, remember? You did the job anyway." I looked out at the city. Slowly, sector by sector, the lights were coming back on. The mag rails began to hum. The docks began to roar. The manifest of the world was being written anew, not by kings or emperors, but by the people who actually moved the boxes. "Come on," I said, offering her my arm. "The lights are on, and I believe we have 100,000 marks and a full tank of fuel to discuss. And a new ship," she reminded me. "The best in the galaxy." "Well, maybe second best," I said. "The Star Skimmer had character. It's hard to deliver that." We walked out of the hall together, 2 broken, beautiful, and absolutely uncold people, ready to face whatever the next manifest had in store. The Obsidian Circle was gone, but the lesson was just beginning. The weeks following the departure of the Obsidian Circle were not filled with the triumphant parades I had expected. In the real world, the kind where engines leak and people get hungry, victory doesn't look like a medal ceremony. It looks like a lot of paperwork, several hundred heated arguments over resource allocation, and a persistent, dull ache in your lower back from sitting in chairs that were designed for aesthetic perfection rather than human spinal support. I was currently standing in a makeshift command center located in a repurposed cargo hangar at the base of the Silver Spire. We had moved the heart of the government out of the Grand Hall and down to the docks. It was a symbolic choice, but mostly a practical one. It's a lot easier to manage a planetary recovery when you can hear the mag rails humming outside your window. The supply chain for the sun-side isotopes is still 50% below capacity, I said, tapping a holographic manifest. My voice was scratchy, the result of 3 days of back-to-back negotiations with the miners' guilds. If we don't get the thermal shielding to the outer rigs by 2300 hours tomorrow, the dark side nurseries are going to freeze over. And if the nurseries freeze, we're all eating synth paste for the next 6 months. Vesper stood across from me, her brow furrowed as she studied the data. She wasn't wearing the silver regalia today. She had opted for a practical, reinforced flight suit that matched mine, though hers was significantly cleaner. Her vocal lace was a steady, warm amber, reflecting a focus that was no longer brittle or forced. She was feeling the stress. I could see it in the way she bit her lip. Nahung, she wasn't letting it paralyze her. The Iron Line's former holdings in the northern sector have been nationalized, she noted. We have 3,000 tons of Durasteel sitting in their warehouses. Can we trade that to the guilds for an accelerated mining schedule? It's a solid play, I admitted, but the miners don't want steel. They want better medical coverage and a guarantee that their children won't be conscripted into the Imperial Guard if the circle comes back. Kelder Vespera looked up, her eyes meeting mine. Then give them the guarantee. I'll sign the executive order myself. We're building a new manifest for Kalthura, Kaelen, one where the currency isn't just marks, but trust. Trust. A heavy word for a guy who spent 10 years trusting nothing but his own sensors and the structural integrity of his hull. Package and Signature were busy at the far end of the hangar, assisting Jax in the assembly of a new communications array. The two droids had become something of a local legend in the Twilight Ring. They were the first thing people saw when they walked into the hangar, two massive, dented war machines currently being used to lift heavy crates and calibrate delicate sensors. You know, Voss, Jax called out, his cybernetic arm whirring as he tightened a bolt on the array. This place is starting to feel less like a government office and more like a legitimate scrap shop. I might actually start liking it here. Don't get too comfortable, Jax, I shot back with a grin. Once the nurseries are back online, I'm putting you in charge of the atmospheric scrubber maintenance for the whole sector. You wanted a challenge, didn't you? Jax groaned, but his vocal lace flickered a satisfied green. He was a man who understood the value of being useful. Most people did, once you stopped treating them like numbers on a spreadsheet. As the day wound down and the permanent sunset of Kalthura cast long violet shadows across the hangar floor, Vespera and I walked out onto the observation deck. The city was alive. The lights were brighter than I'd ever seen them, and the air lacked that sharp, metallic tang of fear that had defined the ring for so long. You've changed, Vespera, I said quietly. She leaned against the railing, her gaze fixed on the sprawling city below. I have. The memories, they're still heavy. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night and I can feel the exact moment I chose to be cold. It feels like a physical scar. But then I remember the old docks. I remember standing in that scrubber hub with you, absolutely petrified that we were about to be zeroed. And I realized that the fear didn't stop me, she said. It was the first time in my life I felt truly alive, because I was doing something that mattered, even though I was scared. I used to think courage was a crown you put on. Now I know it's just the decision to take the next step when your knees are shaking. I looked at her, and for a moment, the Exarch of Ethelgard and the Void Runner from Nexara Station were just two people standing on a piece of metal in a vast, indifferent universe. I'm still waiting for my ship, you know, I said, trying to break the intensity of the moment with my usual armor. The Star Skimmer was one of a kind. You've got a lot to live up to. Vespera smiled, a real, radiant smile that made the artificial suns above the ring look dim. The delivery is scheduled for tomorrow morning, Royal Council Voss. I think you'll find the specs are adequate. Adequate? For 100,000 marks in a planetary rescue, I'm expecting a miracle. Maybe, she said softly, or maybe just a new beginning. We stood there in the silence, watching the city pulse with the heartbeat of a people who were no longer afraid to breathe. The logistics of hope were complicated, messy, and prone to failure. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't looking for the exit. I was looking at the horizon. The new ship sat in the center of the royal hangar, like a shard of fallen star matter. It was sleek, painted a deep matte black that seemed to drink the light, with silver filigree along the engine cowlings that mimicked the flow of the Silver Line's history. It was a modified Vanguard-class interceptor, but the internal specs had been customized for long-range void running. It had reinforced shielding, a high-output fusion drive, and a cockpit that actually had enough legroom for a man of my height. On the hull, in clean silver lettering, was the name, The Brave Remembrance. "It's a bit flashy, don't you think?" I asked, though I couldn't stop my hands from tracing the smooth line of the atmospheric intake. "It's a royal commission, Kaelen," Vesper said, standing behind me with her arms crossed. "It's supposed to be flashy, but if you look at the cargo bay, you'll see I've added a few features you might find more practical." I popped the hatch and climbed inside. The cargo bay was fitted with high-intensity magnetic locks, a lead-shielded compartment for volatile materials, and a hidden scanning suite that could sniff out a pirate interceptor from 2 light-years away. It was a courier's dream. But it was the small wooden box sitting on the pilot's seat that caught my eye. I opened it. Inside was my old delivery scanner, the one I'd used at the wedding. It was scratched, the screen was cracked in the corner, and the battery was dead. Beside it was a small handwritten note on heavy vellum. "For the man who delivers the truth, even when the manifest is empty." I sat down in the pilot's seat, the leather smelling of newness and possibility. I gripped the controls, and for the first time in weeks, the constant, low-level vibration of my social anxiety seemed to settle. This was where I belonged, not on a dais, not in a council room, but in the cockpit of a ship, navigating the gaps between the stars. But I wasn't going to bug out, not this time. Vespera climbed into the co-pilot's seat, her movements fluid and confident. She looked at the array of flickering displays with the eye of someone who was learning to read the telemetry of her own life. "Where are we going, Council Voss?" she asked. "We have a shipment of medical supplies for the mining colonies on the dark side," I said, punching in the coordinates. "They've been waiting 3 weeks for a priority delivery, and after that, I hear there's a trade dispute on Velonis Prime that needs a particularly perplexed-looking mediator." She laughed. "I think I can manage that, as long as I don't have to wear the crown." "No crowns allowed on this ship," I said. "Just manifest and grit." I engaged the thrusters. The Brave Remembrance didn't just lift off. It surged into the air with a grace that made my old ship look like a flying brick. We cleared the hangar and banked toward the atmospheric exit, the silver citadel shrinking behind us until it was just a tiny, gleaming needle in the twilight ring. As we broke through the cloud layer and the vast glittering expanse of the Kalthura system opened up before us, I felt a strange sense of clarity. I wasn't just Kaelen Voss, the guy who ran away. I wasn't just the delivery man. I was a part of something larger, a network of lives and choices that stretched across the void. I thought about the journey that had started with a simple package to a wedding. I thought about the fear that had been my constant companion, a shadow that I'd tried to outrun for 32 years. I realized then that I'd been looking at it all wrong. Fear wasn't an obstacle to be avoided. It was the fuel. It was the signal that told you that you were standing on the edge of something that mattered. I spent most of my life thinking that the goal was to reach a point where I wasn't afraid anymore. I thought that heroes were people who were born without that hollow, cold feeling in their gut when things go sideways. I spent 5 years as a courier specifically because it allowed me to stay on the move, to never stay in one place long enough for the fear to catch up. But standing on that royal platform and later in the dark of those cooling vents, I realized that I'd been living half a life. If you never feel the terror, you never get to feel the relief of coming out the other side. If you never risk being zeroed, you never truly understand the value of the breath you're taking. I used to think my best delivery was the one that went perfectly, with no complications and a clean signature. Now I know that the best deliveries are the ones that break you open, the ones that force you to look at the person in the mirror and realize that they're capable of so much more than just surviving. We are all just packages in transit, I guess, carrying a weight we didn't ask for. But it's the choice to keep moving, to deliver what's inside us even when the route is hostile. That's what makes the journey worth the fuel. The ship's AI chimed, a soft, melodic tone that Vespera had chosen. Entering the transition zone, sublight engines at 100%. I looked over at Vespera. She was staring out at the stars, her expression peaceful but alert. She had lost her crown, but she had found her soul. And I had lost my old life, but I'd found a reason to stay. "You okay, Your Grace?" I asked. She turned to me, her amber eyes reflecting the light of 1,000 distant suns. "I'm petrified, Kaelen. It's a long way to the dark side, and the obsidian circle is still out there. We have a planet to rebuild and a galaxy that doesn't like change." I smiled, a real steady grin that felt right on my face. "Good. That means we're exactly where we're supposed to be." I pushed the throttle forward, and the brave remembrance vanished into the dark, a tiny streak of light carrying the weight of an entire world's hope. I've spent a lot of time thinking about that wedding day, and how a simple delivery changed everything I believed about myself. I think we all have a package we're terrified to open, a part of ourselves we've kept shielded because we're afraid of what happens if the world sees it. I've learned that the most dangerous delivery isn't the one with the explosives or the illegal tech. It's the delivery of your own heart to a cause bigger than yourself. I wonder, what is the one thing you've been running from because you're afraid you aren't strong enough to face it? What would happen if you stopped looking for the exit and just decided to take that first shaking step forward? The stars ahead were bright, and for the first time, I didn't need a scanner to know I was home. Vespera reached over and adjusted the sensor gain, her hands steady against the glass.